Hello, this is part 14 of the video series Judaism Influenced Zoroastrianism. In this video, we will be reviewing the topic of the linguistic dating of the Avestan texts. First of all, a brief recap. The dating of the Avesta is by the linguistic style. The Gathas are generally dated between 1500 through 1000 BCE, while the portions of the younger Avesta are generally dated to the period of the Achaemenid era. Now keep in mind that the manuscript copies of the Avesta are dated to the 13th century CE, while the content of those manuscripts are linguistically dated to the Achaemenid period and prior to 1000 BCE. Now, the main problem with dating texts on linguistics is that there is no standard method for measuring the age of the Avestan language. Consider this statement by Houston Abolala Saldivar. The wide range of dates proposed by the proponents of the first school is proof enough that their methodology is inconclusive. Mary Boyce, for instance, at first proposed a date range of 1700 to 1500 BCE, based on a perceived similarity of the Avestan language with that of the Indian Rig Veda, but then reduced it to 1200 BC as philologists began to gravitate around an arbitrary round figure of 1000 BC. The fact, though, is that the dating of the Rig Veda itself is hypothetic, and why philologists such as Kellens argue about the archaic nature of Avestan language and a linguistic hiatus between what they term as Old and Young Avesta, none of them could ever propose a reliable methodology for measuring the age of the Avestan language. Philology is not an exact science, and their dates are based on a guess. A guess based on experience may be valuable, provided it is relevant. In this case, it is not, because even if true, it is not decisive. As Gershovich has argued, the development speed of languages can vary, and different dialects may evolve differently over time and space. English, for instance, which is an offshoot of Germanic languages, has evolved more than present-day German, and Tehrani Persian has advanced more than Afghani. Moreover, out of respect for tradition and to impress their followers, men of religion have always favored an archaistic language. Thus, if one stumbles onto a copy of Divinis Perfectionis Magister, dated January 25th, 1983, of the late Pope John Paul II, one cannot declare it to be a very old document on the basis that no one spoke Latin in the 20th century Italy. The priestly style of the Avesta is archaistic, but not necessarily archaic or ancient. Now, these two paragraphs from Houston Saldivar's paper just practically demolish Mary Boyce's dating of the Gathas, and they also damage the ideas of an early date in the Achaemenid period. Houston Saldivar goes on to state, among Darius' innovative approaches was his reformation of the concept of Kapharna by associating it with solar radiance, in conjunction with his emphasis on possessing the Aryan Kapharna, which he described as the radiance of the Aryans. But since the same power was later on attributed to Zoroaster, we have a solid proof of the partial composition of the Avesta in the post-Achaemenid era. This, in turn, invalidates the very foundation of the believers in an archaic and ancient Avesta, who insist that the Avestan language was only in use circa 1000 BC or earlier. Their theory, in reality, is a house of cards built on quicksand. And if that citation from Sandovar is not damaging enough, and if there are those who would continue to speculate that Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest religions, then here are a couple more quotes from a paper written simply by Antero, in which Antero cites Richard Fry, who is one of the most respected experts on Persian history. Richard Fry states, certain features of the language of the Gothas and the younger Avesta as well are more archaic than corresponding features in Vedic Sanskrit. But this, of course, does not mean that the Gothas are therefore older in time than the Rig Veda, since, as a parallel in Altaic languages, modern Mongolian in many features is more archaic than the oldest Turkish, and Arabic is in the same relation to Hebrew. Antero also quotes Walter Henning, in which Walter Henning states, on the date there have been in essence only two opinions. The Zoroastrian tradition has preserved a date which would put Zoroaster in the neighborhood of 600 BC. Opinion is divided according to whether this traditional date is accepted true or rejected. Those who reject the date seem to do so not so much because of reasoned arguments, but out of a vague feeling, the feeling that the Gothas of Zoroaster are old, ever so old, as if 600 BC were not old enough for almost anything. It was due to the same kind of vague feeling that earlier generations of scholars attributed the Rig Veda to the 3rd millennium BC, an estimate that is thoroughly discredited nowadays. Of course, this feeling is not, as a rule, represented as such, but appears in the guise of specious reasoning. In the case of Zoroaster, we have to deal chiefly with two pleas. One is a linguistic argument of such extraordinary feebleness that one is amazed at finding it seriously discussed at all. The other is the hitherto unsuccessful attempt to set the traditional date aside by showing that it is not a genuinely transmitted date, but one found by the calculation in later times. So in summing up this video, I would recommend to all of those who still hold the view that Zoroastrianism is indeed a very old religion, and perhaps the oldest religion of all the history of the world, that you would re-examine the facts and simply ask yourself a simple question: why do some scholars say that it is the oldest? And so I put the two links of the material that I discussed in this video, and I would invite everyone to study that material and I believe it is good scholarship. This concludes part 14 of the video series, Judaism Influenced Zoroastrianism. And keep seeking truth, and God bless you all.